Hey everyone, welcome back to In Her Wallet, a weekly podcast helping women around the world take control of their finances for good and build better financial futures, one episode at a time. My name is Sofiia. I am your host, the founder of In Her Wallet, and an accredited investment representative here in Canada. What we're talking about today is caregiving for our aging parents. Considering the audience of In Her Wallet podcast is anywhere between the ages of 20 and 40 years old, I thought that this could be a great discussion we can have since caregiving costs can be a significant component that can have major personal finance consequences on an individual level. And to have this conversation, I have an amazing guest I am very honored to have here at In Her Wallet podcast. Her name is Leanne Kaufman. Leanne is the president and CEO of RBC Royal Trust, and she's responsible for the overall strategy and management of the business, which provides wealth management and transfer solutions across generations to high net worth families here in Canada. Leanne, thank you so much for being with us today and welcome to In Her Wallet.
Oh, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Perfect. Okay, let's start with a little bit of an icebreaker so our community at In Her Wallet can get to know you a little bit better. Tell me, what's your go to coffee order?
That's a trick question. It depends on the time of day. If it's the morning, it's black or Americano, but if it's the afternoon, I like a little latte.
Nice. What's your movie that you can rewatch again and again? Do you have one?
Well, I have a few of them, but I'd say that the go-to is always and forever going to be The Princess Bride.
Oh, I haven't watched that.
Oh, okay. There you go. Now you have something to do on the weekend.
Exactly. And finally, Leanne, if you could go anywhere in the world right now for travel, where would that be?
I want to get to Southeast Asia. I want to be able to see and well, okay, Southeast Asia or the South Pacific. Now I can't decide. Beach or adventure. I'm going to you know what? We'll change it. We'll go South Pacific. I'll go to Bali and places like that for a while.
You will love it. You will love it. Have you been there before?
No, no.
Okay, that's the beautiful place to explore. Okay, Leanne, let's jump in into our actual conversation. Can you tell us a little bit more about RBC Royal Trust and what you do?
Yeah, so RBC Royal Trust is Royal Trust itself, before it was owned by RBC, was its own standalone financial institution, and it's coming up on its 125th anniversary. It just happened to be called Royal Trust even before it was part of the Royal Bank of Canada financial group, but it's a nice synergy. So, what we do is we act as executor, trustee, and power of attorney for clients who don't have or don't feel that their friends and family network is the appropriate choice. Or we can help clients who find themselves having to act as executor or trustee or power of attorney because it's what we do all day, every day. And so, most individuals don't have to take that kind of role on more than once, or they do it infrequently. And so there's a lot of administrative burden that they don't understand. They don't know where to start, and maybe they don't have the time or the inclination to do it. And so we can use our infrastructure and our expertise to help them do their job.
I love it. And it totally blends so well into our conversation with you, what we're going to be chatting about today. Can you highlight a few things about your position and your day to day activities? Obviously, you're the president of the Royal Trust, a very high profile position. So happy to see a woman take that role. So, can you give us a little bit of an insight into what your day to day looks like?
Well, never the same day twice, but there's the running of the business, which could involve, the minutia of what do the financials look like, what are we doing for projections, the whole P&L side of the business. There's never a shortage of HR issues when you are part of a big organization. So it could be, things tied to employee needs or employee issues. We do a lot of partnership. So there's a lot of engaging with other parts of RBC or outside um, we call them centers of influence, so lawyers or accountants who may have clients that would benefit from our services so that we can stay well connected to them and make sure that we're working in partnership together. And then there's, this new part of the job that has evolved mostly during COVID, where I work a lot with the partners and the partners' clients on issues tied to late life and aging generally. And so a lot
Mhm.
of marketing, education and awareness, information, and content creation tied to all of these issues.
Wow, that's a lot for one person, but obviously I know you have a very big team.
Yeah, great team.
Exciting.
Hmm.
Thank you so much for giving us your time. Honestly, such an honor. Leanne, let's first of all establish some common ground. Where does caregiving come into the picture when we talk about personal finance? And maybe you can give us a little bit of an entryway into why this topic is important and close to you.
Right. Well, okay. So let me start by saying caregiving is very much still a women's issue for the most part. We're still the primary caregivers, regardless of whether we're talking about kids or parents. It still seems to be, it's not universally true, of course, but the greatest impact does still seem to be with women. So I think you've got the right audience for the conversation for one thing. My own personal interest, or the reason that I know how important and impactful this can be to a person is because I have lived experience with it. Many years ago, my own mom got quite ill unexpectedly. We didn't see it coming. It wasn't sort of a long-standing degenerative issue, and she needed help. She and my dad needed help in the home. Then she was hospitalized. We needed help in the hospital, and I didn't know how one went about getting professional help. I knew where my limitations were, how much time and expertise I had. I knew what my dad's limitations were. So I knew that we needed some private support or some outside support. And I was literally turning to Google and saying, how do you get a private nurse? Didn't know what a PSW necessarily was, personal support worker. And so I knew that there was a gap of knowledge because I had a gap in my own knowledge. And so if it was happening to me, it was happening to lots of others out there. So I think that where it hits the connection with finances is, of course, there are publicly available supports, government subsidized or government paid for supports for caregiving, but they're insufficient, they're hard to access, and they're inconsistent. And so it's important to think about, as part of your financial planning, for example, if you're thinking about how you're going to age, where you're going to age, what you want that to look like, think about, no, be aware of what the cost of care might be. If you want to stay at home for as long as possible, and that means bringing someone into the home to help look after you when you need that help, that could be help with meals, help with cleaning, help with bathing, or 24/7 in an extreme case, 24/7 help. What is that going to cost you? And where's that money going to come from? So there is a
Mhm.
real interlink between the two.
Thank you for sharing your personal experience. Obviously, you've lived through that, so you know how to handle a lot of this now, and it's not just textbook knowledge. I like how you mentioned that we women are affected disproportionately when it comes to caregiving, both as with giving caregiving responsibility and as receivers as well. Can we talk a bit about the importance of why we should think about this in advance as women?
Well, and you make a good point about being disproportionately represented on the receiving end of caring as well, because statistically, women still live longer than men, which means we're going to outlive any partners or spouses that are in our lives. And so, we are probably the ones that are going to have to fend for ourselves one way or the other. And so
Yeah.
planning for it, I mean, it's like all planning, right? Being educated on something and knowing what might come is better than not. You can't plan for these late life things. Some things will happen to us, other things won't, right? But having a bit of a plan in place to say, if something like this were to happen, this is how I would want to be cared for. This is where I would want to be cared for. And communicating those wishes, because sometimes once you're in that situation, you're no longer in a position to communicate those wishes, and we work with a caregiving expert, and she likes to make the point of saying, when someone is laying unconscious in the hospital, that's not the time to say, gee, I wonder what mom would have wanted us to do in this situation. I wonder where she would have wanted to go. So, and I know,
Yes.
choices change as you age, and as you're actually living the experience versus thinking about it hypothetically. Your decisions may change, but that's okay. At least you've got a baseline of knowledge if you've done a little bit of
Hmm.
planning, a little bit of educating of yourself in advance. The other thing I'll say
Yes.
is, I want to go back to the financial aspect, and as it relates to women, we've been working with a group called the Women's Age Lab out of Women's College Hospital recently, and they've done some work on something called gendered ageism. And I think that this is something, it seems very commonplace or commonsensical when you say it, but you actually have to read it or think about it. So they're saying that women in retirement who are living longer, who will have probably longer costs associated with their late life, are already disproportionately underpaid in retirement relative to their male counterparts for a number of reasons. One, you've got systemic gender gaps in pay during a career.
Yes.
Two, you have women stepping out of the workforce once, twice, three, four, five times. Maybe it's just for kids. Maybe it's for kids and they step out again in their later career to caregive for older relatives. Those are pensionable earning years. Those are gaps in pensionable earning years. So there's a lot of factors that add up cumulatively to end up with having women at much lower pension levels than their male counterparts.
I like that you highlighted that study. Thank you for doing that. I think it definitely adds additional perspective to the whole picture. So, Leanne, when we are thinking about potential costs associated with caregiving, can you give us a little bit of an idea of what those can add up to of when we're thinking about financial planning? What are these numbers?
So if you're looking at getting private care to come into the home for a fixed number of hours per week, in today's terms, you could generally carry the number of $35 an hour across the country, generally speaking. I
Hmm.
mean, some differences. But when you're looking at having to bring someone into the home at those kinds of levels, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, you're suddenly potentially over $300,000 a year just in care costs. That doesn't include, rent or mortgage payments or property tax or, whatever the actual living costs are that pre-existed the care. So then you flip it and you say, okay, well, that's too expensive. I'm going to run out of money too fast if I need that. So I guess I'm going to have to look at some sort of assisted living or long-term care facility. So then, retirement homes with or without assisted living, that's probably a minimum of $3,000 to $4,000 if you really don't need any assistance. You're just getting your meals provided, and you have the communal living of being with other aging Canadians, I'll say. And it can be upwards to $10,000 to $15,000 per month to be in one of
Mm.
those private facilities, particularly if we're talking about needing something like dementia care as part of it. And then there's
Hmm.
the whole government funded side of things and the long-term care facilities that where it's paid for by the government, which are the ones that tend to get the negative press when we think about things like how COVID treated long-term care centers and things like that.
Mm-hmm. Leanne, thank you for highlighting that there are different options. First one, having people come into your home, more of a private care, and another option of caregiving facility. I think very helpful to understand that. Our audience here at In Her Wallet are women who are in their 20s and 30s and 40s, who might be thinking of taking care of their aging parents.
Yep.
And obviously, the numbers that you just stated are very high.
Mhm.
So, how can these women approach conversations with their parents about potential financial responsibilities and how to prepare for it?
It's so tricky, and it's not a common conversation, right? It's not something that
Yes.
comes up at most people's dinner tables. But I think taking advantage of either a story of a family member or friend that you've been made aware of, or maybe even something like listening to this podcast and then taking it back to have a conversation with your loved one to say, I was listening to this and I had no idea, mom, dad, did you have any idea how expensive it is to get someone to come in? I heard it was $35 an hour and that retirement homes are this much. And have you thought about that? Have you talked to your financial people about that? What does that look like for you? What would you want to
Mm-hmm.
have done? And use it as a bit of a gateway to have that conversation. And you can make it about you, right? You can make it about I'm worried about this, and then it might
Mm-hmm.
make it easier to get the older generation talking.
Great idea. I like that. And again, the importance of having a conversation and understanding what your parents want for themselves. I mean, that's key. As you mentioned, oftentimes these events um, come unexpectedly.
Yeah.
So if you prepare and educate yourself in advance, then you have more peace of mind down the road.
Yeah, it's
Leanne,
really hard to make these decisions and have these conversations when you're in the moment of crisis. Yeah.
exactly. And then everything is totally. So now that we've started talking about conversations with parents on caregiving plans, I think this can also be a good time to approach the talk about estate planning and
Hmm.
about their estate plan. That's another sensitive and difficult conversation, but one that's important to have. Leanne, can you walk us through what an estate plan is for those people in our audience who might not know and why it's important in today's day and age to have one?
Yeah. So an estate plan is really kind of a holistic view of everything tied to what may happen to your assets when you pass. So, of course, the will is kind of the cornerstone document, but it's not the only, just because you have a will, it doesn't mean you have an estate plan. Um, the power of attorney document and the will should be considered hand in glove. Everyone needs a power of attorney. Everyone needs a will. Everyone in your audience needs both of those documents, whether you think you need it or not. We did some survey work. We found that 70% of Canadians under the age of 34 still don't have a will. 65% of Canadians across all age groups said they still don't have a power of attorney. And the number one reason was they didn't know how to get started. And then the number 2 and number 3 were, I don't think I have enough assets, and I think I'm too young. And I'm here to say all of those things are myths. They're not reality. While the probability of you needing those documents is, of course, much, much lower, knock on wood, cross your, whatever the case may be, but the impact to the people that you're leaving behind of not having those documents is every bit as huge when you're young and you don't have a lot of assets as it is later in life, because you're forcing your loved ones to go through a court process to get the authority to step into your shoes and to act for you if you're incapacitated temporarily under the power of attorney, or to wrap up your estate. So I've just gone down a bit of a rabbit hole there on a soapbox around wills and powers of attorney, but it's very
No, I love
important.
everything you shared.
So the estate plan looks more holistically at everything, and so it would include things like, do you have a life insurance policy? Who is the beneficiary of that? What impact does that have on what you've put into your will? What about registered plans, RSPs, TFSAs, etc.? Do you have registered beneficiaries on designated beneficiaries on those plans? What's the impact of having those beneficiaries you've chosen for those accounts on what you've said for your, who you want to take your assets under your estate and your will? Are they different? There's tax implications to the beneficiaries under your estate if you give your RSP to one person and you leave the rest of your estate to someone else, and you don't equalize for tax purposes. You're going to be burdening one of those people with the tax uh, relative to the other. I won't get into the details, but all of this to say it's complicated stuff. You think of it like a spider's web. You touch one piece, the whole thing shakes, right? So you can't look at
Yes.
these things in isolation. They need to be looked at holistically and all as part of an entire review. I haven't even talked about things like probate planning for people that are in provinces where probate matters. We've got tax issues, And so, it's not just a will. The estate plan needs
Mm-hmm.
somebody that works with this in this area with some expertise, understands where all the points on the spider web are that might shake when you touch something, and can advise you accordingly.
Mm-hmm. So, taking it back to our conversations with aging parents, what's the best way to start this kind of conversation with your parents and find out if they have an estate plan and all of these documents in place?
Yeah, well, again, you might want to use that example of, oh, I just heard a terrible story about someone whose mom passed away and she didn't have a will, or I was listening to this podcast, I read this article. But, I think you just ask, have you got a will?
Mm-hmm.
Who's your
Mm-hmm.
executor?
Mm-hmm.
Who have you, am I your executor? Well, can we talk about that? If I'm going to be your executor, I need to know where things are. Have you got a net worth statement set up somewhere so that I know if the time comes where everything is? Let's talk about that. I know I've heard that you can get these binders, right? Where you can set out all the information. Maybe we should do one of those together. So I think, again, you can approach it from a bit of a mom, dad, you're going to help me if you open this information up, and it will make me sleep better at night knowing that you have a will, that I'm not going to have to go to court, that if I'm the executor I know where everything is, if I'm not the executor I know who is, all those questions.
You did bring the power of attorney and executor words into the conversation. I want to touch base on that. What do these roles mean in a general explanation?
Yeah, so in a power of attorney situation, you are stepping into the shoes of the person for whom you're acting, either temporarily or permanently, depending on why you have to act. Is there something that's happened that's rendered them temporarily incapable of managing their affairs, or is this a long term thing? And you have to act solely in the best interest of that individual. There's two types of power of attorney. There's one that covers property, all the financial side of things. And then there's a different document that covers personal care and someone who can make those care and lifestyle decisions for you. So they don't have to be the same person. They can be. Um, I come from Royal Trust. We act as attorney for property only. By law, we're not allowed to take on powers of attorney for personal care. So effectively, it's stepping in and making the decisions that you would have made with respect to your finances. Let's just focus on the attorney for property for a minute. Um, with with no consideration other than what's in your best interest. That's really the
Mm-hmm.
role of the attorney. And so it means that you need to understand the nature of the assets that that person has, how to access them, where to go to speak to people about things like, are there credit cards that need to be shut down because this person no longer has capacity? Lots of upfront work, and then a real heavy ongoing responsibility to be managing the affairs of that individual. So the executors, of course, only comes into effect on the passing of someone, and their job is to, in effect, gather all of the assets, pay off all the debts, including taxes, pay back taxes if they haven't been keeping up to date with their tax returns. It's now the executor's personal responsibility to get those taxes filed. um, Pay off it may say in the will that they want specific gifts given to people, so make sure that those get paid. And then once they've gathered all the assets and paid off all the debts, there's a pool of money left called the residue of the estate, and then that residue gets distributed out to the beneficiaries, of which the executor may be one or they may not, in which case you're doing that job either as a favor or you're getting compensated for it.
Leanne, I just want to confirm one thing here with you. You did mention debts. So if you have been named an executor, does that mean that that person's debts get carried over to you, and now it's your responsibility to pay them off, or do they get nil? Do they just get canceled out? How does that work?
Yeah, no, you don't have to assume the debts of the person for whom you're acting. You are supposed to file a notice of to creditors to protect yourself, to make sure that you've kind of put a call out there to say, speak now or forever hold your peace if this person owed you money. So once you've done that, you've protected yourself as an executor. But there can be bankrupt estates. I mean, if the debts exceed the assets, then it becomes a bankruptcy or an insolvency. And so
Mm-hmm.
then it's as if that happened during your lifetime, like there's an order of who gets paid first and that kind of thing. But no one has
Yeah.
to assume the debt.
Got it. Okay, that's good to know. And you did mention earlier in the conversation the folders. In one of the articles I read about that were written by you on the RBC blog, you mentioned a "When I Die" folder, and I found
Hmm.
that tip extremely useful. Can we
Hmm.
just highlight a little bit of what that is?
Yeah, so what that is reference to it, like, I mean, in the old days, it would probably be an accordion file or a file cabinet drawer. Now it's probably more digital files, but in effect, it's a consolidation of everything that your attorney or executor would need to know. You're making their life easier. So, where did they bank? Where did they have investments? Do they have any private company interests? Is there a safety deposit box, and how do you get into it? What's in the safety deposit box? There could be, you'd be surprised how many times we still see physical share certificates. Where are the debts? What kind of, there could be credit cards, obviously, lines of credit, mortgages. But then there's other information in there that isn't necessarily just account related, like who is your lawyer, who's your accountant,
Mm-hmm.
um, information about your tax returns, digital assets. Okay, a big issue now. So everywhere you've gone on the internet where there could be value or information tied to accounts or assets, you got to figure out how you're going to get your attorney or your executor access to those. And so there's, it's quite comprehensive. There are resources available, online or through your financial institution. We certainly have no shortage of them at RBC, where you can have these, the beginnings of these inventories or when I die binders, whatever you want to call them. Now, our colleague that I was mentioning, the caregiving expert that we work with, she has, her name's Audrey Miller, and she has something called a wellness binder. And so in that wellness binder, she includes things like what medications are you on, other things, care related things that um, your attorney might need to know, or even little things as you get older, like if you have people coming into the home to do caregiving, some very basic information. If it's not always the
Mm-hmm.
same people coming in, what do you like to be referred to as? Do you like to be Mrs. So and so, or do you just want to be known as your first name, or is your first name actually a nickname? And let's make sure, how do you like your tea? All these things.
A lot of details. So this perhaps could be a very good point once you start that conversation with your parents, to give an idea to start creating a binder like that. I
Hmm.
think, right?
Yep.
Uh, Leanne, I think we've done a great job uncovering how that conversation with your parents can get started and how to handle it. You did mention at some point in the episode that about, I think you said 73 or 78% of Canadians before the age of 35 do not have a will in place. And you did mention three reasons. I do not have a will in place. And all those three reasons are the reason why I do not have a will in place. So I have a question for you. When is the right time to create a will?
Well, I'll give you the ideal right time, and then the right time that other people usually use. Okay, so the minute you turn 18 and you have a bank account or a car or anything in your name, to me, that's the right time. And I do have a friend who said that she gifted her 18-year-old children wills on their 18th birthday, which they did not appreciate, but nevertheless, she felt it was the right thing to do. Um, but most people, I would say, put off doing a will until there's some sort of a milestone. So, marriage, um, buying a house might be that critical milestone. Definitely having children is a very common
Mm-hmm.
one where people say, okay, now I need to get my affairs in order. Um, Remarriage, it used to be, it's still the case in a few provinces. I can't tell you which ones off the top of my head. It only recently changed in Ontario, for example, that marriage would actually revoke a will. So if you had a will in place and you got married, it was as if that will didn't exist anymore. Um,
Oh.
Having said that, separation and divorce do not necessarily revoke. So it depends on what you're talking about. So if you're going through marriage or breakdown of marriage, get some wills advice. Um, but I honestly believe, because it is such an arduous and unnecessarily, like, procedural headache for the people that you leave behind if you don't have this document in place. Just get it done. Like, it doesn't need to be complicated, right? It doesn't need to be fancy. There are online will drafting kits now available that are, we work with Epilogue Wills, and um, they're not for everybody. They're definitely not for people with complexity. But if it's simply a matter of, all I want to do is, like, save my family the heartbreak of having to deal with an intestate estate, just, you know, get it done. Get it done.
Get it done. Yes, thank you, Leanne. That's very helpful, I think, for a lot of people in our audience, myself included. So, as we are kind of coming to the time at the end of the episode, I want to ask you two questions to wrap this conversation up. These are the questions I ask every guest on the episode on the podcast. First one is, what does financial freedom mean to you?
Oh, financial freedom means not being dependent on anybody for what I want to be able to accomplish in life. And I have two kids. I have a son and a daughter, and I tell both of them equally, just don't be financially dependent. Learn to not have to need someone else's money to achieve your own goals.
I love that. I love that message. And Leanne, what are the tips you want to share with women in our audience if they want to achieve that level of financial freedom?
Well, I think they're doing their first right step by being a part of your community, because they're educating themselves. So, read a lot, listen to a lot of podcasts, educate yourself. It doesn't have to be fancy. There's some pretty simple, tried and true, conventional ways out there to start building your personal wealth, even on a very gradual basis. Compounding is your friend, and over the long term, set aside some money for yourself that you never touch, and um, you know just educate yourself.
Thank you. I totally agree with you. Leanne, thank you so much for being with us today, for sharing your knowledge and experience. I think this episode will be so well received, and it's full of golden nuggets of information spread throughout. Before I let you go, can I ask you, for women in our audience who might be willing and ready to take steps towards those caregiving and estate planning conversations,
Mhm.
how can they use the help of RBC Royal Trust, and what's their first step with the help of your organization?
Yeah, they can start by taking a look at our website, which is RBC Royal Trust, under the RBC Wealth Management arm, and taking a look at the kinds of services and educational information that we offer, and then reach out through our contact us form on the web, or we have a 1-800 number there too if you prefer telephone, and we'd be happy to start the conversation depending on what your need or your concern is. There's this is a broad swath, as you can tell, um, of products and services, and so we want to help educate and try to keep it as simple for everyone as possible.
Thank you so much, Leanne. Thanks for sharing that. And thank you for being with us.
My pleasure. Thanks for inviting me to join you.
Thank you all for being with us today. I hope you enjoyed this episode. As always, I want you to give yourself credit for showing up for yourself and your future, because every time you do that, you increase what's financially possible for you. Thank you all, and I'll see you next time. The views in this recording are the personal views of both speakers and should not be considered the views of RBC Royal Trust. This commentary does not constitute financial, investment, tax, legal, or accounting advice, nor does it constitute an offer or solicitation to buy or sell any securities referred to. Individual circumstances and current events are critical to sound investment and financial planning. Anyone wishing to act on this episode should consult with his or her advisor.